a hallucination can kind of be thought of as a statement that's statistically probable but factually incorrect. I like that. I read that statement somewhere. I was like, that's a perfect way to describe it. Statistically probable, factually incorrect, right? And again, this is one of the reasons that people are building grounding systems around AIs like RAG, because it's a safety mechanism. It's a security mechanism, like you said, right? To make the answer more reliable, make it more accurate. It's certainly a concern for us as we were building the product, building it into our product. And it's also why you see disclaimers like on chatbot systems. It's like, hey, LLMs can make mistakes. Please verify your answers, because hallucinations are and will continue to be a problem, even with grounding systems around the implementation of these. So I think it's a great question.
Are hallucinations the biggest threat to the success of an AI right now, and trying to put guardrails around it so that you're not giving incorrect information, or is there something else that keeps you up at night?
This is Identity at the Center. If it has anything to do with IAM, this is the go-to podcast. Now your hosts, Jim McDonald and Jeff Stedman.
Welcome to the Identity at the Center podcast. I'm Jeff, and that's Jim. Hey, Jim.
Hey, Jeff. How are you?
Not so bad. Yourself?
Just living the allergy life, man. Even though we've gotten to the point of daylight savings time is over and temperatures are getting cooler, my allergies just keep getting worse. So if it sounds like I only breathe through my mouth, that's why.
Well, yeah, if you could just not breathe and make sure the audio quality sounds good, that would be fantastic for me.
Yeah, sure. I'll die mid-episode.
Well, today's a special episode because we've got a sponsored spotlight, and we're joined by our friends from Strivacity. His name is Steven Cox. He's a co-founder and CTO. We'll welcome here in a second, but just to make it crystal clear, this entire episode is sponsored thanks to Strivacity. We work with folks like Steven all the time to try and come up with different entertaining shows around their specific viewpoints into different things that they approach from identity space. So I'm sure people enjoy it. We've had actually Steven on before in the show. Steven, you joined us way back in episode 112. So welcome back to the Identity at the Center podcast.
Thanks a lot, guys. Yeah, it's great. It's great to be on. I always enjoy talking with you guys, and I'm proud to have been number 112 on your podcast.
An early supporter, we appreciate it. You were with Strivacity then, you're still with Strivacity now, and that website is strivacity.ai. So make sure you get it out there. strivacity.ai. Definitely encourage people to go check it out. But why don't we start sort of at the very beginning? Tell us about Strivacity and give us a refresher on how you got into the digital identity space.
Yeah, so I've been in the digital identity space now for, about 10 years. I came from a sort of network and endpoint threat detection background. I worked in that space for a number of years. I've been in cybersecurity for probably about 20 years now. I joined, about 10 years ago, I joined a company that your listeners are probably familiar with, SecureAuth, with who is now my co-founder of Strivacity, Keith Graham. And so I focused on, workforce identity management and customer identity management at SecureAuth, which, informed a lot of my current beliefs around customer identity platforms. So yeah, that's kind of how I got my start in this space. And Strivacity is a customer IAM solution. We got started in about 2019. So we've been going about 5.5 years now. So we're focused on the customer identity problem end to end, right? You hear lots of terms thrown around in this space: customer identity, consumer identity, but fundamentally, like, we're a CIAM solution, and that's the problem we're interested in solving for our customers.
So what is it about your guys' approach to the consumer or customer? Because we're talking CIAM, right? CIAM here.
Yep.
What makes you guys unique? Because I think that's the question that I always have for folks in the space. Okay, well, there's lots of solutions in the space. How are you guys different? And how do your customers measure success with with your products?
Yeah, so there's a couple things I focus on when we talk about differentiation. What sort of brings us out from the pack, and the three things I like to really talk about are our architecture, our capabilities, and our focus on customer experience. So in terms of architecture, we spent a lot of our early days focused on building a platform that could scale with the unique needs of customer identity. As we were building, we kind of set some design principles out to help guide us. And those principles have evolved over the years, of course. But I can give you a high level kind of what we were thinking. One of the big ones was like going after the cloud hesitancy problem, right? This is less of a problem than it was now than it was in 2019, but it is still an issue, and it centers around that hesitancy of organizations to move certain types of data or systems to the cloud for a variety of reasons, right? We learned a lot about this in previous experiences before Strivacity, so we wanted to really attack that head on. Another thing we sort of observed at previous experiences was that CIAM projects were sort of excruciatingly long and laborious, kind of often for the wrong reasons. And we wanted to sort of go after that problem. Customer identity has some unique requirements. It requires you to move quickly, to iterate quickly as sort of customer patterns change and you discover new customer patterns. We wanted to bring the whole customer identity journey under the umbrella of a single platform, right? Something that had not yet been achieved in 2019 and arguably still has not been achieved or only been achieved by us today. Sort of goes along with that are things like brand management, which was sort of horribly broken until we came along. So you have these orgs that are sort of brand organizations, have a sort of a parent company and multiple sub brands. That's a challenge we run into. So we developed an architecture that takes these challenges into account, right? We're built on Kubernetes. Our platform scales with demand. It can be upgraded using rolling upgrades, which means no downtime. Each of our customers, and this is a big point, gets an isolated instance of our product, right? We call this isolation by design. And that's really what we're doing to sort of address that cloud hesitancy issue, right? It also helps with sort of data sovereignty requirements, but we believe this is sort of superior to multi-tenant architectures. And then orchestration, we have an intrinsic orchestration capability that's tailored to the customer journey, runs in a serverless environment. And then everything is protected by sort of role-based access control, right? So that's sort of the architecture differentiation. In terms of capabilities, as I mentioned, we're sitting here today, we're kind of the only solution that covers the full spectrum of customer identity needs, right? From a single product, single admin console. So if I put on my marketing hat, I say things like, hey, we can handle customer identity from sort of registration to the right to be forgotten, right? So the sort of beginning to end. And so, our capabilities cover things like registration, self-service, adaptive auth, identity verification, consent management, fraud detection, right? And then in terms of customer experience, you have to think about CIAM systems as fundamentally workflow or journey systems, right? You have to build a whole layer on top of that IAM tech around generating flexible flow-based UIs for customers to interact with. So we think we've done a pretty good sort of differentiated job and sort of making it really easy to do this. So how do our customers measure success with the solution? That's a great question. I love that question. There's kind of two areas that I would focus on here. One is time to value, right? We talked about sort of deployments being long. This is time to value is largely focused on things like deployment, sort of setup of the solution, things like customer journeys and sort of the migrations of users, right? And the other is sort of ongoing KPIs around things like adoption metrics and customer engagement. And this is something where we really differentiate with our dashboard, right? So, you've got to make that really easy. We can report on a few dozen different metrics, across things like conversion rate. How many visitors are actually converting into registered users on your platform? Engagement rate, like how are your user base sort of coming back every month, right? How long are they taking to register from the moment they click sign up to the moment they're redirected back to the customer portal? So these are things that you have to report on, right? So that they can your customers can sort of take those KPIs back to their management team and sort of show that they're doing a good job, right?
So let me ask you a real basic question, because I feel like sometimes there's just devil in the details. Is there a difference between consumer IAM and customer IAM, or are they really the same thing?
Yeah, there is a difference. I would say it's like a Venn diagram, right? Where there's overlap and there's separate capabilities, right? So a lot of the sort of fundamental IAM technology underneath, things like federation, OpenID Connect, SAML, those sort of basic, techs. Are certainly within the middle of the Venn diagram between customer identity and workforce identity. But when you get into things like sort of customer metrics, like how long is a user taking to register? Are you getting people that are sort of registering and walking away? There's not a whole lot of overlap there, right? Those are very customer specific metrics, and those are things that your sort of marketing team wants to know that your users are converting, right? That your users are making it in a workforce environment. You kind of have a captive audience, right? Like you're not going to have somebody that sort of refuses to register with the workforce, access management system. And so there's that's sort of where the sort of the on the outside of the Venn diagram. You know what I mean? But yeah, it's a good question.
Yeah, Steven. So I thought it was real interesting that our conversation started going down this kind of marketing track because, a big thing I wanted to talk about today was AI, of course. But even before that, it's just the topic of identity security. And, we had this episode scheduled for several months in advance. I've been in communication with Keith. And then just recently, Gartner kind of identified you guys in a paper. Mm-hmm. It's called Emerging Tech Landscape for Startups and Security Software. And there is a digital identity column, if you will. And I think it's interesting because I'm still not sure what is the difference between digital identity and identity security. I think that's maybe an episode for the future. But what do you think it was about Strivacity that made Gartner sit up and take notice?
Yeah, I mean, so Gartner's been talking about us, for a while across a couple of different areas, which is kind of interesting. Journey time orchestration is one where we've appeared in their research because that's a capability of our product. Sort of fraud and risk is one because we have some fraud controls. We have things like identity verification and user experience, right? Which is something that's going to make us stand out because it hasn't been a focus of a lot of our competition. And also, we're one of a small number of entrants into this space in the last 5 years that's taken significant investment, right? And especially one that's focused on the customer identity problem and has made sort of customer traction, made some significant customer traction into this space. So I think it's great that they're taking notice. I mean, it's helping us with brand awareness. It's very crucial for our company, our stage, to have that, and it's also kind of a sign that we're probably getting things right. From the analyst point of view. And in terms of sort of other analyst activity, we actually debuted as a leader in the Forrester Wave for CIAM in 2022, which is just absolutely unheard of. Like for a startup to sort of debut as a leader, we were one of only 3 leaders, number 2 after ForgeRock at the time. There's another wave due soon. I think we believe it's going to be sometime in December. Gartner doesn't have a Magic Quadrant specifically for CIAM, but like I mentioned, they're talking about us, across other areas of research, which is great. And if I'm going to be self-serving, I'll say that such a young vendor debuting as a leader, again on Forrester is really a testament to the strategy and just how good our product is. I think. Our architecture, our breadth of capabilities, our focus on customer experience is really what's behind the interest from the analysts.
Yeah. So you talked about the isolation by design. I think that's just really interesting. But talk to us about why that's important from a identity security standpoint.
Yeah. So I came from an incident response background. So I worked in network and endpoint security for a company called Mandiant, probably heard of, later acquired by Google. I sort of saw the worst of the worst of breaches, right? So when you're asking a large org, a large financial institution, a large healthcare business to sort of move their data to the cloud, you better be protecting it, right? So one of our sort of fundamental design principles was we're gonna give an isolated instance of our product to each of our customers, right? That means that if one of our customers is breached, the blast radius between one customer to the next is null, right? Like there's no shared infrastructure, no shared keys, databases, services between any two of our customers, right? And that's absolutely critical in customer identity, because you're storing sensitive customer data. You're storing passwords. You're storing MFA credentials. Like this is really, really sensitive data that you're storing. So you have to sort of take a really strong security posture with how you design these systems.
There was a LinkedIn post that Jim actually made about why IAM tech companies aren't really getting into the generative AI space of their products yet. I think that's getting a little bit dated, Jim. No offense, because I think we're starting to see it more out there. But and you responded back to that. Like, what prompted that response back? Was it just familiarity with Jim, or were you like, oh, hold on a second, buddy, you're way off base here?
Well, I mean, one, I do like you guys, so I do.
Flattery will get you everywhere on this show.
Yeah. So that was certainly one. But I don't know. It was interesting. It was during a time when we were sort of deeply pondering that very question, right? So it sort of struck me as a very relevant question from Jim, kind of considering where we are in the space, where we are in sort of the development of AI, where we are in the identity space. Every sort of product leader right now is having to make a decision as to whether integrating generative AI into their platform makes sense, right? And IAM products are no different, than that. So that was kind of the reason.
Jim, you wrote this article, and I don't want to leave people behind. So you kind of give like a gist of it, so we can catch people who are listening or watching.
Yeah, it wasn't really so much an article as much as it was, a true question. Like, it seems like every product is now baking in AI, but in the IAM space, at least what I'm seeing is, versions of AI are more big data analytics, machine learning. They're not generative AI like what you get when you go out to OpenAI or, Gemini or something like that. Mm-hmm. And, I throw this one back to Steven because, is that what you see as well? Like there's a difference between machine learning and big data analytics and AI, right?
Yeah, I think definitely. You need to take a step back and sort of think about like what is the intersection between AI and ML, right? Like the media often gets this wrong, as you've likely noticed. And I think the way to position is that AI is a sort of overarching term of which machine learning is a subset, right? It's correct to say that ML is a form of AI, but ML has been sort of historically focused on finding patterns in data and getting smarter over time so that you can make decisions on what it finds and protects. So if you think about ML, we've actually, we specifically, Strivacity has had it in our product for a number of years, right? Specifically around the behavior analytics problem. So sort of watching user behavior, detecting when there's an anomaly, sort of making access decisions based on that. And to be honest, like this ML-based behavior analytics is by no means a new technology. The first UEBA vendors got their start in 2014 and 15. I mean, that's an eon in technology terms. So it also means it's very tried and true technology for what it's designed for, right? Now, if you're talking specifically about generative AI or Gen AI, that's what we sort of most recently added to our platform, and what I think a lot of product practitioners are sort of pondering right now as to what makes sense for them. If you talk about Gen AI as sort of also being a subset of the overall AI space, it also makes use of machine learning. Gen AI models are designed to emit or produce data versus simply analyze and classify data. But they also have other elements that sort of fall into that bucket. a good example would be like natural language processing, right? The chatbot aspect of Gen AI systems is a somewhat separate space, and it's all about determining user intent, or what they call grounding in the Gen AI space. So when you sort of couple a prompt that you're sending to an LLM with live data, right? You might have heard this referred to as retrieval augmented generation, or RAG, which is the way that a lot of products right now are implementing AI into their system. So, if we circle back, like I say, we've had ML in our product for some time. Gen AI was a recent addition. I hope that was a pretty clear description of how I see them differently.
No, it's great. I mean, I feel like we can really dive into this, because we kind of joke all the time that we should turn this into like AI at the center, the way the space is moving. My definition of AI changed when I first saw the OpenAI LLM sort of released, and I was like, oh wow, okay, that AI before that really was like machine learning and sort of like behind the curtains. And now all of a sudden we've got a text-based interface at the time, and now it's even voice, that you can, buddy up with and ask questions. Now, do you trust it or not is a different, answer or question. But did your definition or your thought process around AI change when you saw that, or you'd already seen that coming? I mean,
100%. I mean, I was sort of, thinking about, putting some thoughts and notes together today for the discussion today. I realized that ChatGPT was only released like in 2022. It was only 2 years ago.
Right.
I mean, that's crazy. That it seems like it's been like 20 years. You know what I mean? And so, yeah, I mean, I think I was just as shocked as a lot of the folks in the technology space were at the sort of power of these systems. 100%. It completely shook my understanding of the space. 100%.
So let's get more into that AI, because I mentioned the website Strivacity.ai. It's literally in the name.
It is now.
What are some of the things that we can expect if I pull up Strivacity? Give me some examples of like use cases.
Yeah. So on the benefits, sort of like the benefits of pulling this into our product, there's a couple things that really just line up with how we have built the product from the beginning, right? One of those is sort of lowering the bar, of entry to IAM systems, right? We always say that you don't need to, you shouldn't have to have a PhD in IAM to set up a customer journey, right? And so, Gen AI makes a really good companion to work with as you're sort of configuring and maintaining your IAM systems. Things like context sensitive help, where you're asking questions of an assistant on how to, that AI assistant on how to do certain tasks within the platform. Like, we can tell where you are in the admin console. We can send along pertinent context and our docs to the LLM to craft a very specific answer. Like, so, hey, how do I set up bot detection? Or how do I change my password policy to be more restrictive? Like, we can really help with context sensitive help, right? That's a huge. There's one thing we wanted to build for a while was context sensitive help, and Gen AI is a great way, to sort of facilitate that. Interpretation of data is another one that we thought was really important. Like IAM isn't just about like MFA and federation, right? We can also generate a lot of data. It's often hard for less technical people to grok, right? Specifically in customer identity, where some of your users of the platform may actually be, in fact, customer service representatives, CSRs, who aren't deeply technical in IAM areas, but they may actually be actively on the phone with a customer and they're trying to troubleshoot a customer issue. So roll-ups of these types of these log data, of this customer journey data, can actually be really helpful in getting to an answer quickly when a customer is unhappy, right? We can say like, oh, this user is struggling to get through the identity verification process, or they're not able to finish their password enrollment, those kind of things, right? So that's really helping there. And then also, like, one of the things we wanted to really focus on, and I think is really big benefit, is sort of the guidance towards best practice or optimization aspect. So, there's a lot of best practice out there, password guidelines, adaptive access policies, what if you could guide a team or a user towards improving their posture based on what they're actually seeing in the product? Specifically on the CIAM side, what if you could guide a team towards optimizing customer experience or improving conversion rates by what you're seeing in the logs, what you're seeing in the data, what you're seeing in the dashboard. So those are kind of the focuses and kind of the things that you can kind of do with our current AI assistant in the product.
Yeah, I'm interested in visualizing in my head, how does that take place? So that last part that you're talking about, where it's like, all right, I want the system can make suggestions to your client in terms of access policies or things. How does that manifest?
So when the user comes along and they're looking at a particular portion of the admin console and they ask a question, we do a form of retrieval augmented generation, which is RAG, which is just a really complex way to say that we take the prompt, we take the context of what they're looking at in the admin console, and we take a relevant section of our docs and we send all of that to the LLM at the same time. And we say, give me an answer built from this prompt, this context, and this documentation. Now, this is obviously a very simplified version of a complex thing, but that's what happens. And then the LLM has what it needs to answer the question in a way that's very specific to our product and relevant to the context of what the user is staring at that point in time, right? And this is a pattern that you will see in the Gen AI space right now, of people doing these RAG-based systems that are marrying a prompt with context, with documentation, with maybe stuff on the web, right? OpenAI can do that when you ask a question about current events. It's going to go out and search the web, search news articles for relevant stuff, and then give you a context relevant answer. That is another form of RAG, right? That you're seeing OpenAI implement in their ChatGPT tool. So it's a common pattern.
That seems like a really clever way to help with the security of the model itself and reduce the chance of a hallucination, right?
Yeah.
I think everyone's kind of concerned about, will the AI give me a correct answer and can I trust it? And what if it comes up with something completely off the wall? But it sounds like if you're able to limit the input into that model and have it just be based on your documentation, the chances of it going off the rails are probably a little bit, better for it not happening.
100%, and that goes back to the comment I made about grounding, right? Grounding is a necessary technology in sort of implementing Gen AI systems, Gen AI products, because basically what you're doing is you're closing those guardrails in a little bit, right? And you're giving an LLM more information to give you an accurate answer. Right. And if you think about, I love the hallucination topic. I think it's great that you brought that up. I mean, there's been some really fun stories about that in the media. And I think it's really useful for your listeners to understand what a hallucination is and why you need to understand why they happen. And I think if you look at what an LLM fundamentally is, it's a probability machine, right? I'll probably get blowback from your users for that simplification, but maybe it's better to say that they're sort of fundamentally probabilistic in nature. So what they're trying to do is they're trying to figure out what the next word, character, phrase is based on the context that they know about what you've sent it, right? So a hallucination can kind of be thought of as a statement that's statistically probable but factually incorrect. I like that. I read that statement somewhere. I was like, that's a perfect way to describe it. Statistically probable, factually incorrect, right? And again, this is one of the reasons that people are building grounding systems around AIs like RAG, because it's a safety mechanism. It's a security mechanism, like you said, right? To make the answer more reliable, make it more accurate. It's certainly a concern for us as we were building the product, building it into our product. And it's also why you see disclaimers like on chatbot systems, it's like, hey, LLMs can make mistakes. Please verify your answers, because hallucinations are and will continue to be a problem, even with grounding systems around the implementation of these. So I think it's a great question.
Are hallucinations the biggest threat to the success of an AI right now, and trying to put guardrails around it so that you're not giving incorrect information, or is there something else that keeps you up at night?
I mean, hallucinations are definitely a challenge. I think you can kind of, especially when you're not sort of implementing what I would consider a public API, a public AI system like ChatGPT. Ours is very specific to our product, so we can really control what sort of goes into it. But you have all kinds of other challenges, like prompt injection is one, right? Because it's not all that different than like a SQL injection, where you're taking a prompt, you're formulating it into a larger prompt, and you're injecting that in the LLM, and a smart user might figure out what the format of your prompt is and sort of break out of it in some way, right? And try to get data out of your system. But you can also put, a system like ours, you can also put guardrails further down the road so that you're not able to return, or you're only talking to certain APIs that are read only, and you're putting some security guidelines past the LLM point within the product. So those kind of things keep me up at night. Honestly, I think the other thing that keeps me up at night is sort of the cost around these systems, right? That was the first thing. One of the first things that I thought about when we said let's put this into our product is like, oh my gosh, how much is this going to cost, right? Like, it's compute and memory. It's it requires you to sort of have specialized GPU heavy instances in the cloud, and so when you're sort of talking about large scale systems where a user, you have customers that have tens of millions of users, a large portion of which log in every month. Like, are you being careful about how you're leveraging the tech, right? With regards to large scale deployments, that was sort of a big worry for me. Less of a worry now, but was a big worry at the start.
Yeah, you're starting to get into where I think the big value and the big threat are. So I think the big value is being able to enable, say, marketing. You brought up the marketing example, but business users to query the data so they can start saying, okay, well, how many people logged in the last 24 hours? That's one level. Another level might be, now let's branch out into information that's on the internet. How many people logged in the last 24 hours from somewhere that was raining?
Right.
And, so the concern it brings up is like, okay, how far can it extend? Could I, what do I have to do to create security boundaries to make sure that I don't say, all right, what is my competitor doing on this system? How many users do they have?
Yeah.
And maybe I do that in some kind of like less obvious way, right? Maybe I know that my competitor is using this system, so I start asking questions like more at like an industry level, like what do organizations that are in my industry, how many users do they normally have? Things like how many times do people log in the last 24 hours for other organizations that are in my industry? So
right.
I think that's the real power, would be to be able to ask reporting style questions that it could really think about. And maybe you could even pitch it scenarios like, all right, well, if a hurricane took out power over this large portion, Jeff and I certainly know that problem.
Talk about timely. Yeah.
how would that impact my logins? I know this is IAM. This is I can't really basically go as far as to say how would that impact my sales, but maybe something like that.
Yeah.
And then I think the big threat is the more powerful that becomes, the more security becomes an issue, which probably goes to like, how did you guys go about deploying this? Are you leveraging like the APIs of some big tech platform? Did you develop your own AI? Or like, how did you build AI into your product?
Yeah. So again, we focused on isolation from the get-go, right? Which actually put us in a pretty good position for implementing this technology into the platform. So we're leveraging an existing LLM, but it's local to our customer environment, our individual customer environment. So they get their own instance of our LLM within the customer, within their own product instance. So we're not using a public LLM like OpenAI, right? And as soon as you open that door where these systems are able to sort of go out to the internet, or go out to a third party system, that opens a lot more risk than having a system that's sort of self-contained within our admin console, within our own customer instance, that only has access to that customer data within that instance. So, in terms of like an isolation or sort of a securing a customer perspective, we were kind of already in a good position for that, right? In the way we wanted to implement that, and there's a lot of local open source models out there that are extremely powerful and well suited to RAG systems like what we built within Strivacity. Everything else, around it, we built as custom, right? The actual RAG implementation, the user interface, the sort of AI assist interface we have in our admin console, things like that. That's all custom. Yeah.
Do you see do you kind of agree with the point that I was making where definitely I think the things that you talked about, a lot of power in that and a lot of benefit in having contextual based help.
Yep.
But I think kind of that next frontier is, just leaving it open to non-technical people to be able to query the system, query the data.
Yeah, and that is something that we can do as well. Like you can pop into our account events interface and sort of ask like, hey, who are the, tell me about the users that have logged in today in terms of like where did they come from and what were they doing and is there anything anomalous, right? Like you can do things like that. But it's it's obviously very secured. It's obviously very controlled to that specific customer data within that customer instance, and we don't sort of allow you to sort of go allow our system to sort of go out and query the internet or sort of other external systems. And the other thing that's interesting too is that we have role-based access control in the product, and we treat the LLM like any other subset of functionality within the product or any other sort of area that lets you get access to sensitive information. So if you don't want certain employees or groups to have access to the LLM, then you don't give them that right in the admin console, and they can't, right? So if you want to control who sort of has access to those, that's a great way to do it, is with RBAC.
That was the question I was going to get into, is how you control access to either the LLM or what the LLM has access to. I think that second scenario is a lot more difficult, right?
It is, yeah. And so if you think about these sort of RAG-based AI systems, they're kind of chains, right? So you might have multiple LLM calls, you might have multiple API calls, right? You might have a first LLM call that's sort of like, hey, what is this customer asking for, right? Then you might make a call out to an API, it's probably going to be one of our internal APIs to pull data. You might get some context back. Then you might make another LLM call with that context to get the final answer, right? So they're implemented as chains. But that when you implement them as chains like that, you also have an opportunity to sort of introduce security restrictions at different steps, right? So it's like, hey, yes, I am not going to allow any API calls that do a write or only can access this subset of APIs within our product. That's kind of the idea. Yeah.
So, Steven, where do you see this being 5 years down the road? Like you said, 2 years since ChatGPT kind of hit the mainstream.
Yeah.
And look where it is already. I mean, 5 years might be, I might as well say, in an eternity, but where do you see this 5 years down the road impacting the identity space?
Well, I mean, if I could send the the shrug emoji to your users, I would. It's really hard to say. I mean, I thought you positioned it really well earlier when you asked, like, was it sort of, was it sort of a big change on the way you think about things when ChatGPT came out? Because it really was. It's really hard to say because we're constantly being surprised on what these LLMs can do. I mean, generating like lifelike video and all kinds of, crazy stuff like this. And the AI firms sort of keep bringing out their latest and greatest models, right? And they just keep outdoing themselves. But I'll tell you one thing that that really piqued my interest recently. It's that the large tech firms like like Google, Meta, they're seeking out other sources of energy beyond the energy grid, right? So they're talking about like obtaining access to nuclear energy or building their own nuclear energy infrastructure. That's just insane to me. But it tells me two things, right? It tells me, one, we're taxing the energy grid right now. It's not going to keep up with the demand of this technology, right? And it's also a hint that those firms are sort of acknowledging that, right? It means that they're acknowledging that any efficiencies that they design into these systems or the distribution of the compute of these systems, pushing it down to devices or things like that is not going to keep pace with the demand, right? So that points to for me to the technology reaching a plateau shortly, because once you run into issues with resource scarcity, it quickly becomes geopolitical, right? And we all know humanity has done a great job at sort of sanely sharing resources in its history, right? So, but yeah, I mean, I kind of think we're only scratching the surface of this tech right now. I mean, like I say, ChatGPT came, like you mentioned, came only out in 2 years ago. Seems like eons. I mean, that's nothing. That's I would equate unleashing AI on the world as equivalent to the advent of the consumer internet, the invention of the microchip, the industrial revolution. I mean, I think it has that level of impact on the world. Like I can't imagine where it's going to be in 5, 10, 50 years from now. I mean, it's insane to think about.
Yeah,
it's mind blowing.
I mean, do you think that it's going to evolve so quickly that whatever governance is needed to, keep it from becoming a dangerous weapon, that it's going to outpace that ability to govern it, or that we will be able to govern it? I know it's kind of a crazy question, but
it's a tough question. I think it will probably outpace our ability to govern it, especially with the fact that you have sort of open source capabilities around this. I think governments haven't really done a good job at sort of keeping up with technology governance in the past. So there probably will be a crackdown at some point, but it just all speaks to more of like keeping the inventors of this type of technology involved in the governance of this technology. But it's going to be a very tough problem. I think it's really going to outpace our ability to sort of keep a lid on it.
Yeah, I think if history is any guide, it's difficult to keep up with tech. It just moves too quickly.
Yep. Yeah, and our elected officials aren't really sort of equipped to understand this technology at any level and sort of the applications of it and the impacts of it. And they'll get there, but it's moving so fast right now.
Mm-hmm. Going back to the power requirements, sounds like we need a Tony Stark type person to come up with an arc reactor that we can stick into a data center somewhere and have it just power that thing and just be good.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it was just insane to see the tech firms sort of going after nuclear power to keep their data centers running. You know what I mean? It's just crazy.
Microsoft and Microsoft AI and Microsoft nuclear, like that is a weird thought to say.
Yeah.
All right, why don't we go ahead and wrap it up there? This has been, we could talk AI all day for sure. I'm looking at the Strivacity.ai website, and you almost stole all the kind of the thunder of the website, because on the screen I'm looking at right now, it has like this little picture of access control settings, and then you got the AI assistant, basically asking, hey, are these settings secure? Which I think is a really cool way to approach securing the product, right? Especially you mentioned, being able to train it on your documentation. It's like, okay, here's exactly what I'm looking for. And I love that idea of leveraging those AI assistants to help with that, because I don't want to pick up the phone and talk to somebody. I want to do it myself, right? I want to be able to look it up and say, okay, click this, do this here. Okay, good. Now I kind of get it. So it's a really cool example of how you guys are approaching it.
You've got it.
Yep. So let's talk a little bit about astrophotography, because I did my first astrophotography just a few weeks ago.
Oh, yeah?
So I'm in the Asheville, North Carolina area, and we had northern lights basically come down as far down as we were. And that was the first time I've ever experienced anything like that. And it was almost invisible to, the naked eye. But when I pulled out my phone, and that's all I had, to kind of take pictures, all of a sudden I've got this picture, and it's like reds and purples are in the sky, and it's 2 a.m. or whatever it is. I'm like, wait a second, that's not what I saw, but that's what the camera picked up. And I'm just fascinated by this idea. So I started looking at it, well, can I download an app or something to kind of capture this better than just the the iPhone? And so I'm curious, because I think you're into the astrophotography stuff too. I want to get into this a little bit more with you.
Yeah. So it's actually something that I recently got into as well, like as in this year. And it's it's something I've wanted to. I've had a telescope for a while, like a nice one, but I've never gotten into sort of the like post-processing part of it, and so I think one of the things that was sort of holding me up on it was, some of these rigs that you build for sort of capturing deep space objects can be like incredibly expensive, like $5,000-$10,000 if you really want to build like a really nice rig. But there's actually this really cool, and something you might want to look into if you have an interest. So there's these really cool set of like smart telescopes coming out where you can, they're not very big. You can sort of put them out, in your yard and train them on an object that you want to record, and then they have an app where you can sort of control it and capture images, and they actually can produce some pretty amazing images. So they'll take exposures, like they'll take like 10-second exposures, and you leave them out there, and maybe over the night you take 500 10-second exposures, and then they have stacking tools, right? So you take all of these images, you stack them together. It does some crazy calculations on the pixels to decide what is noise and what is image, what is signal. And you get this beautiful image of like a deep space object, right? Like, so like of a nebula or, of a galaxy, right? And I was, like I said, I was afraid from the cost requirements, and I was afraid that I wouldn't like the post-processing angle of it, just, because it's a whole new sort of technology to learn, but I love it. It's actually another place that the AI has made an appearance, because they have these sort of AI driven noise algorithms that people have developed, where they try to figure out like what is signal and what is noise, and sort of remove the noise from an image. So you can produce these visually brilliant images from a little telescope sitting out in your backyard because of the way you're stacking the images and the way that you're denoising them, right? We've had a really good run of sort of clear nights here in Virginia, and I've been out in my backyard like almost every night doing, taking pictures. So,
well, that's the key, right? Yeah. Is light pollution kind of really impacts that. So if you're in a rather remote area where there's less of the light pollution, you're more prone to be having to have better quality for the images.
Right. Like yeah. And they call that the Bortle scale. And so it goes from like 1 to 9, I think. But I'm in a Bortle 5 area, so I'm right in the middle, because I'm right outside of a major airport where I live, so that you get a lot of light pollution from. But we go down to the Outer Banks of North Carolina a lot. I'm sure you're familiar with, and a lot of people don't realize that is actually one of, especially the Ocracoke area, is one of the darkest areas in the United States, and it is one of the darkest areas on the East Coast as well. So you can actually get Bortle 2, which is the second darkest on the Bortle scale. So and having the little smart scope, you can kind of take it down there. It doesn't require a lot of space. So like when we go down there, I'll take it down there and sort of put it out on the back deck and get some really good pictures because it's so dark down there.
So from what I understand of Ocracoke Island, you take a ferry to get there, and you have to have a 4x4, and you drive on the beach and pick your spot, and you can camp or whatever. A lot of people go surf fishing. So you go onto this island and you set up your telescope and your camera.
Yeah, you could do that. Yeah, I mean, Ocracoke you have to take a ferry to. Yeah, but there actually is Route 12 goes. It's a major road goes all the way down to the city of Ocracoke. But yes, if you go out on the beaches of Ocracoke when it's a clear night, you can see the Milky Way without any imaging equipment at all, and it's amazing. Ocracoke's beautiful. If you haven't been there, I highly recommend it. So
yeah, that's what our ancestors did, right? They just looked up in the sky. There's no light pollution.
Yeah,
we did an episode pretty recently with a guy named Nitin. He's the CTO over at Zilla Security, and he rents part. He's in a group of people who rent a telescope. And Jeff made the statement, which I thought was spot on. Like, this must be an expensive telescope. If it takes several people to kind of pull their money to rent,
like in a trailer and everything.
Oh my gosh, yeah. Some of the Dobsonian telescopes are really big. Yeah, so they're and they're actually less expensive. I don't know why that is, but yeah, they can be pretty big. But one of the reasons I got into the sort of smart telescope area was because they're portable. You know what I mean? It can pack down into a little box, and I can just throw it in the back of my truck on the way down, to the Outer Banks. So
I had to look up the Bortle scale because I hadn't heard of that before. Because I know I live in an area with less noise pollution, and it looks like the actual area is around a 3 or a 4. So
wow, yeah,
pretty good. And I've got a mountain range in between where my house is and the rest of Asheville, so it's even darker. So I feel like I'm in a good spot.
So if I drive a little bit west of where I am, I can get to the Shenandoah Mountains, and I can get some really good dark spots out there. But again, like even in a high light pollution area, you can pull a lot of the light pollution out of the images in the post processing part of this. So there's people that take great pictures like out of Tokyo where it's Bortle 9. So it's so some of the denoising algorithms are pretty fascinating. You stack enough images, you can figure out what's noise, what's light pollution, and what's image.
Plus, you get those cool like motion ones across the sky, right? Where it's like
with the
you get
star
the same
trails.
image, and here's the only thing that's moved, right? Yeah, and stuff like that. Yeah.
Yep.
So, if someone wanted to get into this, what would be the beginner? And let's say it's me on my back deck, trying to have maybe just a slightly better setup to do some astrophotography.
So, there's a company called ZWO, and they have a couple of scopes called the C Stars, and so there's like a C Star S30 and a C Star S50, and they are the highest quality, sort of easiest beginner scopes that you can find. They'll actually live stack they can live stack the images that you take while you're using the app. So you don't even really need to do post processing on your own unless you want to throw something into like Photoshop or something. They'll do the stacking for you. So you pop the scope out in the wherever you want to image. You actually can tell it like what deep space object or what the moon or what planet you want to look at. It'll point the scope at that. It'll start taking pictures. It'll stack it for you, and you get a nice little image on your phone and your tablet. I'm a big fan of that company.
What do you do with the pictures that you take?
I post them on Instagram and Facebook, and share them with my buddies.
Wallpapers, print them out, put them on behind you.
I haven't done that yet, but that would be a good idea. My kids also enjoy seeing what I'm doing and taking pictures of, so I share it with them too.
Well, maybe C-Star wants to sponsor an episode in the future.
There you go. Yeah.
Stuff like that.
I'm sure they'll appreciate the mention.
It's a tiny little, I'm looking at the one right now, and it's definitely a tiny little thing. It's much smaller than I anticipated it being.
Yeah.
Well, that's super cool. I think this is probably a good spot to leave it with a product mention for another company. So let's get back to Strivacity, Strivacity.ai. Steven, you've been great again. I hope we can talk again in the near future. I really like what you guys have done with the AI assist. And so I'm definitely encouraging people to go check it out. And been a big fan of what you guys have been working on for the last, couple of years now. So it's been exciting to see that evolution, happen over in, I won't say real time because, a couple of years is a blink in the eye of a tech spot, but it's been really impressive.
Thanks. I always appreciate talking to you guys. I hear that you guys are like celebrities at conferences now, and people walk up to you and recognize you and stuff. So I'm honored that you would have me on your show again. So I'm looking forward to the next time.
Well, we appreciate that. Yeah, for sure. And definitely appreciate all the listeners that come up and I try not to be awkward when I can do it. All right, let's go and leave it there for this week. You can find Strivacity on the web. Again, Strivacity.ai. We'll have links in our show notes, and so people can check that out. And then, Steven, I'll put a link to your LinkedIn profile as well.
Okay,
in case people have questions or maybe just want to talk about astrophotography. I'm sure we would appreciate either of those things. And as far as we go, we're on the web, idacpodcast.com. And we got the YouTube channel going now, idacpodcast.tv. So feel free to like and subscribe. Jim's shaking his head, make sure I get that plug out. But yeah, thanks for everyone for listening and or watching. And we'll talk with you all in the next one.
You've been listening to Identity at the Center. We hope you've enjoyed the show. Make sure to like, rate, and review. And we'll be back soon. But in the meantime, hit the website at identityatthecenter.com. See you next time on Identity at the Center.